Hi, I'm Father Joseph Mary, and welcome back to A Simple Word, where we reflect on the gospel for the coming Sunday. On February 15th, 1947, Glenn Chambers boarded a plane bound for Ecuador, where he would begin his work in radio evangelization. But Glenn never arrived. In a horrible accident, his plane crashed into a mountain peak and spiraled downward, killing everyone on board. Later, it was learned that before leaving the Miami airport, Glenn had wanted to write a quick note to his mother, but all he could find for stationery was an advertisement torn from a magazine with a single word printed across it: why? Around that word, Glenn quickly scribbled his final note, and not long after Glenn's mother learned of his tragic death, his letter arrived in the mail. She opened the envelope, took out the paper, and unfolded it, and staring her in the face was the question: why? In the face of suffering, confronted by the consequences of evil, it's the same question we ask ourselves: why? This Sunday's Gospel from Matthew brings us to the end of the lengthy commissioning of the 12 speech, which we heard part of last Sunday. Again, Jesus is instilling in his followers the requisite conditions for discipleship. Last Sunday, he spoke about fear, and telling them what to fear and what not to fear. And this Sunday, he speaks about love. And Jesus tells them, whoever loves father or mother or son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. The word translated love here is the Greek philia, meaning to befriend or have affection for. Jesus is telling us that our main motivating force in life must be love of God before anything and everything else. And if we truly live this way, we're going to come into conflict, even with the people closest to us, even in our own families. But this was considered the fulfillment of a messianic sign. The Jews believed that the day of the Lord, the coming of the Messiah, would bring about the division of families. So Jesus is telling them not only how they should live, but he's assuring them that the signs are being fulfilled. And then Jesus says something which was almost incomprehensible to his audience. We can't begin to fully understand the shocking impact these words had, because we're not Jews living in first century Palestine. Jesus said, whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. It's the first mention of the cross in Matthew's gospel. The cross. Over 2 millennia of Christian history has in many ways numbed us and anesthetized us to the central symbol of the Christian religion, the cross. We hang them on our walls, we wear them around our necks. But do we realize that what we're wearing is the most gruesome and excruciating means of execution that the human imagination has ever devised? For the Jews of Jesus' time, the image was grotesque and terrifying, because Jews in first century Palestine knew only too well the meaning of the cross. When Judas of Galilee revolted against the Roman forces occupying Judea, the Roman general Varus crucified over 2,000 Jews in retaliation. All along the roads to Galilee, men were nailed to crosses, dying in agony. Crucifixion became the primary punishment for Jewish insurrection. The mere mention of the cross compelled images that haunted the Jewish mind. And this is the very image Jesus places at the heart of Christian discipleship, the cross. But why? A few years ago, I was speaking with a young woman who had wandered from her faith. She was going through some very painful and difficult times. She'd just been diagnosed with cancer, and she was told she would never be able to have children. And I remember she was sitting across from me, and she was crying, and she was angry, and she wanted to know why. And I began to tell her that none of our sufferings are meaningless, that God allowed his own son to suffer on the cross, but she wasn't having any of that. And she shouted at me, "Why? What kind of God is that? What kind of God wants us to suffer? What kind of God lets his son die on a cross?" And as I sat across from her, I felt something like Glenn Chambers' mother holding that torn page from a magazine and wondering why. Why is suffering, why is the cross at the heart of discipleship? Why does an all-powerful, all-knowing, ever-present supreme being choose weakness, suffering, and death to conquer evil? Because evil can't be destroyed. Let me say that again. Evil cannot be destroyed. Because evil doesn't exist. Now, how can I say that? Just look around the world today. All that's happening. Murders, robberies, beatings, child abuse, wars. How can anyone say that evil doesn't exist? But when I say it doesn't exist, I mean that philosophically, evil has no positive existence. There's no something that is evil that I can point to. Evil's a negation. It's the lack of something that should be there but isn't. Think of cold. Cold doesn't have a positive existence. It's what you feel in the absence of heat. Darkness doesn't have a positive existence. It's what you experience when there's no sunlight present. An easier example, the kids I work with in our youth group, they love these slasher horror movies. They go to watch Friday or Freddy or Jason or whoever these people are. Why are these fictional characters so frightening? Because they're inhuman. They lack basic human goodness. There's something missing in them, something that should be there but isn't. There's an emptiness where love and compassion and mercy should be but aren't. Evil's that void within each one of us, carved out by sin and suffering. It's that emptiness where good and truth and beauty should be but aren't. It's a spiritual cancer that eats away at goodness. And moral evil can only reside within persons. This brings us to God's dilemma. If God wants to destroy evil, he has only one choice within the framework of his own creation. He has to destroy people. If God wants to destroy evil, he has to destroy us. This is his dilemma. Evil can't be destroyed, but evil can be transformed. It can be filled. The emptiness in us can be filled through the transforming encounter with merciful love. But for that to really happen, we have to want to be healed. Like that empty inner darkness has to be exposed to the light. The wounds have to be brought to the healer. So God has to convince us. He has to draw us out. His love has to become so clear and so visible and so visceral that it breaks our hearts, that it draws us out of darkness. This is what happened on Golgotha. This is what happens on the cross. Love needed to be so visible, so undeniable, that it would be beaten almost to death, spit on and mocked, humiliated, driven through by nails, pierced by a spear, crowned with thorns. Love's heart would be torn open and pour forth its blood on the earth to prove to every soul in darkness that the light of God's love is greater than any evil. So that we emerge from our night, so that one chink in the armor of our hearts might receive the sunlight and draw us out. This is why Jesus dies on the cross. This is why Jesus places the cross at the center of Christian discipleship. The cross is the ultimate conviction of God's love for us and his final answer to evil. And so today, strive to love God before all else. Embrace whatever crosses are weighing you down today, and you'll become a living sign of God's love for the world. I'm Father Joseph Marion. Thanks for listening to A Simple Word. If you found this helpful, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.